Hello, everybody. It's great to be back in Estonia, and especially because this is my digital residency home, so it's nice to be digitally home. What I'd like to speak to you about this afternoon is artificial intelligence, and been asked to look at it from the perspective of whether or not it's actually going to be our friend or our foe. So let's dive in. It's 2030. Twins are on the way. One of them is going to be a human, the other one is going to be an AI. They're going to start life in exactly the same moment and forever be inseparable. Sound crazy? Yeah? 2 weeks ago, I would have said crazy. So I'll talk to you a little more around some of the work that we're doing at ITripleE towards the end of the presentation. But this was one of the questions that came up in our working group, is that if we start to look into the not-too-distant future and we start to look at the rise of AI, is it going to be something that is going to be born at the same moment as a child? And then what are some of the ethical things that we'll need to think about in terms of who makes the decision around education, nutrition, well-being? Flip it the other way. If an AI is born at the same time as a physical being and is actually designed to protect and take care of that being, is that going to be potentially the greatest opportunity for that individual to have agency through life? And I'm not sure that we have the answers right now. So what I would like to do is explore through this presentation some of the things that we need to be considering from a design point of view. So I say brave different world rather than brave new world, because when I think of just over the course of my life, how dramatically things have changed. And when we think back to our parents' generation or our grandparents' generation, it's really easy for people to get uptight about the way things are moving really quickly and say, oh, back in my day. And I even find myself saying this at times. So I think we need to be thinking about this different. You know, many of the things that we're struggling with right now are not going to go away. Technology is not going to slow down. It's going to speed up. AI is already around us. Some of the work that we've been doing around the access of personal data for the development of autonomous systems, some of the technology that exists today is already beyond our imagination. It's already here. But we're not really here as a society yet in terms of the ethics of it or the understanding of it. This is a quote from Elon Musk. He's been quite vocal over the last few weeks, and increasingly so. And this was off the back of some of the political tension that is happening right now in the United States and between North Korea. And his comment was, if you're not concerned about AI, you should be, because it's vastly more of a risk or a threat than North Korea. And this map here starts to indicate where some pretty smart people and some great technology pioneers are sitting in terms of these two extremes, the not so fast and the hit the gas when it comes to AI. And the not so fast is saying, look, just because we can do some of these things, we need to slow it down. We're at this point in society where things are starting to change, and we need to understand those implications. And then at the other end, we've got, hey, we'll sort it out. You know, mankind has always kind of sorted it out as it comes along, and if there are going to be some casualties along the way, well, that's so be it. And then we have people in the middle that are saying, look, obviously we want to keep advancing this, but at the same time, we want to understand what that impact is going to be to mankind. And one thing that I would encourage each of us in the audience and those listening, regardless of what we're doing with technology right now, or artificial intelligence, or the access to data, is to start thinking about where we are on that map. Are we trying to say, slow down, let's understand the implications, or are we building things that are speeding that up? And if we're building things to speed it up, then we have a responsibility to understand what the downstream effects are. And this is the point that we're at right now. We have some really important choices. And you could say that's true for every generation, and I'm sure it is. But when you start to look at the incredible exponential growth of technology and what it does in our life, and how we are starting to become so omnipresent and integrated and ever connected, some of those choices are more complex than ever before. And some of you that have seen me present recently to talk about these two contrasts, I really do think that one of the challenges for us right now is if we don't get this right, we could potentially create a new form of digital feudalism. You know, it's not out of the realms at all. And so it's one of the reasons why we need to understand the design, because the other side of this is if we get this right, we could actually be looking at a renaissance. And some of the things that John and Pernille have talked about, the rise of the robot, the rise of AI, the loss of physical jobs, I mean, there is a real possibility that there is a flowering, there is a new vision for what humanity could be in the way that we participate in society and the environment that we create for future generations. But, and there's a but, it's really going to depend on the inputs, the ethics, the rules, and the values that we start to code. When you start to look at what an artificial intelligent agent or AI is designed to do, it's this concept of something that is flexible and rational, that perceives its environment and takes actions to maximize its chance of success at some goal. So when you think about it, just in a completely objective way, the aim is to win. So if we want something to work on our behalf, if we want something to negotiate our individual rights and agency in a system of social norms, we need to train it in a way to take those things into account. And if we look at the idea of personal agency or human agency, it's the capacity that we currently have for human beings to make choices, to think, to act in ways that shape the trajectory of our own life. It's our ability to make choices, make mistakes, decide how and who we're going to be in the world. And if we want to preserve that, if we think that's important, then we need to find a way to actually turn that into code. And if we're looking at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, if we actually think that humans, all humans, are born free and equal in dignity and rights, then we have to find a way to get that down to GitHub in a way that when we ship code, we're shipping something that is not just technically beautiful, but also ethically beautiful. And why is that important? This is the critical thing for the future of our children and our children's children. When we were born, certainly when I was born, there were so many silos to my life. The life of me as a patient, a citizen, a student, a customer, employee, were really quite separate. And over time, they may have been able to start to, that's interesting, and see, the integrated world. Those roles start to blend now more and more in the digital world, but previously we were able to keep some of those parts of our life separate. And that's not going to be true for future generations. A child will be born, their medical records will immediately be digitally collected, their citizenship will be digitally recorded, their life as a student, their role as a customer, their participation in society, and that of an employee, all of those roles will start to blend together. So if that's the case, if these parts of life are starting to come together, we need to start to think about training personal AI to move beyond asymmetry, some of the things that both John and Pernille have been talking about, to harmonize personal data usage for the future. So we really need to think differently about how we collect and use personal data. And if you look at what PII is in accordance with GDPR, this idea that any information relating to an identified or identifiable person constitutes personal information. So what does that mean? How is that articulated? Well, it's name, psychological state, genetic markers, mental, cultural, social, idea, online, location. And all of these things on their own tell a lot about the individual. But when that happens, it tells everything about us as individuals. And when we start to look at the rise of the assistants around us, whether or not it's Cortana or Viv or Echo or Siri, these systems are actually designed to automate and anticipate the general needs of society rather than the specific needs of the individual. You know, this is about the collective. This is about anticipating what the answer is going to be in general terms. And of course, these AIs are going to get better and smarter and uncanny, and they're going to learn great things about us. And you know, they'll already help us every day navigate a new city. I mean, it's amazing to turn up in a place and be able to follow a map and feel as if that you are, you know, a citizen of the world. It's really great to be able to use many of these tools. But we can't lose sight of the fact that these are designed in a general way, not in a specific way. And we can't lose sight of the fact that the transparency and the downstream consequences of using these things are not always explicit. So the key thing for us right now and for future generations is this is not just about privacy. Of course, privacy or the idea of being able to decide what we want seen, when we want it seen, is really important. But this is really about power. This is really about making sure that we lay the foundation for future generations to have agency and autonomy, if we believe that that is important to preserve from a human point of view. Otherwise, we risk these black box inputs that lack transparency to humans. And just before, just in the lunch break, I was reminded by a very smart lawyer, I'm just trying to see if he's in the room somewhere, around the rights that we will have under GDPR to understand what the inputs are for AI decisions and to understand specifically how those calculations were made. So it's essential that we require the mechanisms to train algorithms and to develop a personalized AI. It's essential that we're able to access and connect and correct subjective inputs. I find it really funny. I recently accessed the Google profile that they sell for advertising. I don't use an open browser very often because I use Mikko or I use a private browser. But it's really funny, you know, it thinks I'm a male. I love the fact that it thinks I'm 35, that's fantastic. It thinks I'm a software engineer with an interest in sci-fi, and some of those things are true. But the idea that it thinks I'm a particular age and it has my gender wrong makes it very interesting, the kind of content that I get served when I check into an open network in a hotel. And so some of this stuff, if it's important, if this was to do with my health, if this was to do with me crossing a border, if this was to do with a subjective decision that's been made that's yes or no, I need to be able to say, that's actually not me. We also need the tools to be able to organize this data in a machine-readable form and share it. Now, obviously, the GDPR is designed to help us do this from the perspective of consent. The GDPR is designed to help us minimize the cognitive load of processing what consent means so that it is actually contextual and unambiguous. But there is a huge way for us to go to be able to actually process the complexity of some decisions when a machine is able to do this in, milliseconds. And we have to be able to find a way for us to have that same digital proxy and that same processing power so that in milliseconds we can foresee and mitigate the ethical implications of the way that data is being processed, what's being asked and how it's going to be used. We also need to be able to account for our own personal and cultural values. We need to be able to design things that reflect our unique life and our unique preferences. And we need those things to reflect not just our personal choices, but take into account our values, our ethics, our worldview, so that it can negotiate terms that correspond with our social norms. We have that right now in the physical world. It's one of the things that determines a democratic society. And so unless we think we want to give those things up, we need to think about how we can move the processing directly to the individual so that we can start to shape these things. Not so that we can stop these amazing technologies from developing, but so they can actually develop hand in hand with mankind. We also need to think of a new paradigm for the dual existence and for us to rethink individual identity and personal intellectual property. Why? Because fairly soon, if we go back to the idea of a baby being born and an AI being born simultaneously, that's a form of omnipresence. We will be everywhere all of the time. Our AI will be able to look for the best deals, the best airline. It will be able to tell us the right time to leave home, when we should reinsure something, the things we should be eating today from a nutrition point of view, the optimal course we should take. If we start to think about the amount of insight and guidance that may come from anywhere and everywhere, we also need to really think about what does it mean to be somewhere? Who am I? Where am I? What's the real me? And so one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about in closing is a few initiatives that are paving the way to answer some of these questions and also raise some really, really challenging questions. And that is the work that we're doing with ITripleE around a standard called P7006, which is the development of a personal AI agent to work on behalf of a unique human being. So just think about that. Think about that child that's born and an AI that is born at the same time. What could that be like? What are the things that we need to consider? And the aim for the work that we're doing right now in the working group, and a call out to two very important people, and that's John, who presented earlier today, John Havens, for looking at how this was bubbling out of another working group where we were working on the access of personal data for the development of autonomous systems, and starting to see how important this was, that this concept actually had a trajectory of its own. And so I'm really delighted that he was such an encouragement to myself and Guy Hasselbach to start out on this work. So I'm the chair of this working group. If any of you are interested in joining, we need brilliant minds and we need brilliant hearts and we need brilliant engineering, because some of the things that we're wrestling with right now are absolutely science fiction kind of stuff, and we're wrestling with those things right in this moment. The other thing that I'd like to do from a personal point of view, as Juuso said, is I'm the founder of a company called Mikko, and for the last 5 years, we've been dedicating ourselves with lots of getting it right, getting it wrong, learning the hard way, of trying to develop the technology to power personal data. Working on ways to help people wake up in the morning and fulfill outcomes that are in line with the things they want to do. Enroll a child in school, take an airplane flight, eat something, go somewhere. But to do this in a way that is not only privacy preserving, but actually creates real value. To find the way to be able to create a persona, to share with the world the information that is relevant for a particular product or service, or on the other hand, to be able to say, I want to be unknown in this moment, or I only want to give you one piece of data that is relevant to what I'm asking you to do. I don't want to give away my whole identity. So some of the things that we're wrestling with right now in our work around AI is how can we reduce the complexity of decision making for individuals? This is probably the most important thing at the forefront of the work we're doing right now, particularly around consent. You know, with GDPR, we see many positive things, but we also risk a cookie policy kind of mentality with one click, and you've got rid of that question, that box. We've said yes without actually understanding what those downstream consequences might be, both positively and negatively. We're also looking at ways to increase value. We've already seen through the work that we've been doing together with governments, working with telecommunications, working with the healthcare sector, working with financial services, is that when you bring the customer, the citizen, the patient directly into the value chain, amazing value is unlocked. Participation drives value. And if we link this back to John's talk earlier on around gross domestic product, participation as a measure, I believe, is going to unlock exponential value. But we can't do that without including you and I. And managing risk. We need to think about the kind of algorithms that companies have had in the past to manage their risk portfolio, moving to a household. When a household makes a decision about insurance or where a child should go to school or when they take a journey, they need to be able to have the same kind of computing power that an organization has when they process an insurance policy. And last but not least, we're working and testing tirelessly this idea of being able to enable trust, to find the right balance between sharing and making available or providing access bidirectionally so that actually trust becomes the anchor. And one last thought I would like to leave you with is I think it's not going to be that we can turn back from where we are right now, just as we haven't been able to turn back ever before in the history of mankind. We can't just stop technology, and we're not going to stop the rise of artificial intelligence. But as we advance towards this AI world, what we need to design for is empathy and forgiveness. We need to ensure there's space in the matrix for the human spirit to triumph, no matter what. Thank you.